of the movement of the sun in the sky was not a peaceful event. It was an act of wrath and destruction. Plato wrote in Politicus, "There is at that time great destruction of animals in general, and only a small part of the human race survives." The reversal of the movement of the sun was referred to by many Greek authors before and after Plato. According to a short fragment of historical drama by Sophocles, Atreus, the sun rises in the east, only since its course was reversed. Zeus changed the course of the sun, causing it to rise in the east and not in the west. Euripides wrote in Electra, "Then his anger arose, Zeus, turning the stars, feet back on the fire-fretted way. Yea, and the sun's car splendored burning, and the misty eyes of the morning gray, and the flash of his chariot wheels, back flied flushed, crimson, the face of the fading day. The sun turned backward, with the scourge of his wrath in affliction, repaying mortals." Many authors in later centuries realized that the story of Atreus described some event in nature, but it could not have been an eclipse. Strabo was mistaken when he tried to rationalize the story by saying that Atreus was an early astronomer who discovered that the sun revolves in a direction opposite to the movement of the heavens. During the night, the stars move from east to west, 2 minutes faster than the sun, which moves in the same direction during the day. Even in poetical language, such a phenomenon could not have been described as follows: "And the sun's car's winged speed from the ghastly strife turned back, changing his westerning track through the heavens onto where blush-burning dawn rose." As Euripides wrote in another work of his, Seneca knew more than his older contemporary Strabo. In his drama, Thyestes, he gave a powerful description of what happened when the sun turned backward in the morning sky, which reveals much profound knowledge of natural phenomena. When the sun reversed its course and blotted out in the day in mid-Olympus, noon, and the sinking sun beheld aurora, the people, smitten with fear, asked, "Have we of all mankind been deemed deserving that heaven, its poles uptorn, should overwhelm us? In our time has the last day come?" The early Greek philosophers, and especially Pythagoras, would have known about the reversal of the revolution of the sky, if it actually occurred, but as Pythagoras and his school kept their knowledge secret, we must depend upon the authors who wrote about Pythagoreans. Aristotle says that the Pythagoreans differed between the right and left-hand motion of the sky. The side from which the stars rise is heaven's right, and where they set is left. And in Plato we find the direction from left to right, and that will be from west to east. The present sun moves in the opposite direction. In language of a symbolic and philosophical astronomy, probably Pythagorean origin, Plato describes Timaeus, the effects of a collision of the earth, overtaken by a tempest of winds, with alien fire from without, or a solid lump of earth, or waters of the immense flood which foamed in and streamed out. The terrestrial globe engages in all motions, forwards and backwards, and again to the right and to the left, the upwards and downwards wandering every way in all the 6 directions. As the result of such a collision described in a not easily understandable text which represents the earth as possessing a soul, there was a violent shaking of the revolutions of the soul, a total blocking of the course of the same, shaking of the course of the other, which produced all manner of twistings, and caused in their circles fractures and disruptures of every possible kind, with the result that, as they, the earth, and the perpetually flowing stream, rarely held together one with another, they moved indeed, but more irrationally, being at one time reversed, at another oblique, and again upside down. In Plato's terminology, revolution of the same is from east to west, and revolution of the other is from west to east. In The Statesman, Plato put this symbolic language into very simple terms, speaking of the reversal of the quarters in which the sun rises and sets. I shall return later to some other Greek references to the sun setting in the east. Caius Julius Cineas, a Latin author of the 3rd century of the present era, wrote of the people living on the southern borders of Egypt. The inhabitants of this country say that they have it from their ancestors that the sun now sets where it formerly rose. The traditions of peoples agree in synchronizing the changes in the movement of the sun with great catastrophes, which terminated in world ages. The changes in the movement of the sun in each successive age make the use by many peoples of the term sun for age understandable. The Chinese say that it is only since a new order of things has come about that the stars move from east to west. The signs of the Chinese zodiac have the strange peculiarity of proceeding in a retrograde direction, that is, against the course of the sun. In the Syrian city Ugarit, Ras Shamra, was found a poem dedicated to the planet goddess Anat, who massacred the population of the Levant, and who exchanged the two dawns and the position of the stars. The hieroglyphics of the Mexicans describe 4 movements of the sun. Nahui Olin Tanutra, the Indian authors translate Olin by motion of the sun. When they find the number Nahu added, they render Nahu Olin by the word sun in his 4 motion. These 4 motions refer to 4 prehistoric sun, or world ages, with shifting cardinal points. The sun that moves toward the east, contrary to the present sun, is called by the Indians Tetal Lexo. The people of Mexico symbolized the changing direction of the sun's movement as a heavenly ball game, accompanied by upheavals and earthquakes on the earth. The reversal of east and west, if combined with the reversal of north and south, would turn the constellations of the north into constellations of the south, and show them in reversed order, as in the chart of the southern sky on the ceiling of Senmut's tomb. The stars of the north would become stars of the south. This is what seems to be described by the Mexicans as the driving away of 400 southern stars. The Eskimos of Greenland told missionaries that in an ancient time the earth turned over, and the people who lived then became antipodes. Hebrew sources on the present problem are numerous. In Tractate Sanhedrin of the Talmud, it is said, 7 days before the deluge, the Holy One changed the primeval order of the sun rose in the west, primeval order of the sun rose in the west, and set in the east. Tevel is the Hebrew name for the world in which the sun rose in the west. Arabat is the name of the sky where the rising point was in the west. Hai Gaon, a rabbinical authority who flourished between 939 and 1038, in his responses refers to the cosmic changes in which the sun rose in the west and set in the east. The Quran speaks of the Lord of 2 easts and of 2 wests, a sentence which presented much difficulty to the exegetes. Averroes, the Arab philosopher of the 12th century, wrote about the eastward and western movements of the sun. References to the reversal of the movement of the sun that have been gathered here do not refer to one and the same time. The deluge, the end of the Middle Kingdom, the days of the Argive tyrants, were separated by many centuries. The tradition heard by Herodotus in Egypt speaks of 4 reversals. Later in this book, and again in the book that will deal with earlier catastrophes, I shall return to this subject. At this point, I leave historical and liturgy evidence on the reversal of Earth's cardinal points for the testimony of the natural sciences on the reversal of the magnetic poles of the Earth. The reversed polarity of the Earth. A thunderbolt, on striking a magnet, reverses the poles of the magnet. The terrestrial globe is a huge magnet. A short circuit between it and another celestial body could result in the north and south magnetic poles of the Earth exchanging places. It is possible to detect in the geological records of the Earth the orientation of the terrestrial magnetic field in past ages. When lava cools and freezes following a volcanic outburst, it takes up a permanent magnetization dependent upon the orientation of the Earth's magnetic field at the time. This, because of small capacity for magnetization in the Earth's magnetic field after freezing, may remain practically constant. If this assumption be correct, the direction of the originally acquired permanent magnetization can be determined by tests in the laboratory, provided that every detail of the orientation of the mass tested is carefully noted and marked when it is removed. we would expect to find a full reversal of magnetic direction, although repeated heating of lava and rocks can change the picture. There must have remained rocks with inverted polarity. Another author writes, examination of magnetization of some igneous rock reveals that they are polarized oppositely from the prevailing present direction of a local magnetic field, and many of the older rocks are less strongly magnetized than more recent ones. On the assumption that the magnetization of the rocks occurred when the magma cooled, and that the rocks have held their present positions since that time. This would indicate that the polarity of the Earth has been completely reversed within recent geological times. Because the physical facts seemed entirely inconsistent with every cosmological theory. The author of the above passage was cautious not to draw further conclusions from them. The reverse polarity of lava indicates that in recent geological times, the magnetic poles of the globe were reversed. When they had a very different orientation, abundant flows of lava took place. Additional problems of a large scope are whether the position of the magnetic poles has anything to do with the direction of rotation of the globe, and whether there is an interdependence in the direction of the magnetic poles of the Sun and of the planets. The quarters of the world displaced. The traditions gathered in the section before last refer to various epochs. Actually, Herodotus and Mela say that according to Egyptian annals, the reversal of the west and east recurred. The sun rose in the west, then in the east, once more in the west, and again in the east. Was the cosmic catastrophe that terminated a world age in the days of the fall of the Middle Kingdom and of the Exodus one of those occasions? And did the Earth change the direction of its rotation at that time? If we cannot assert this much, we can at least maintain that the Earth did not remain on the same orbit, nor its poles stay in their places, nor was the direction of the axis the same as before. The position of the globe and its course were not settled when the Earth first came into contact with the onrushing comet. In Plato's terms, already partly quoted, the motion of the Earth was changed by blocking of the course and went through shaking of the revolutions with disruptures of every possible kind, so that the position of the Earth became at one time reversed, at another oblique, and again upside down, and it wandered in every way in all 6 directions. The Talmud and other ancient rabbinical sources tell of great disturbances in the solar movement at the time of the Exodus and the passage of the sea and the lawgiving. In the old Midrashim, it is repeatedly narrated that 4 times the sun was forced out of its course in the few weeks between the day of the Exodus and the day of the lawgiving. The prolonged darkness and the prolonged day in the Far East, and the earth shock, i.e., the 9th and 10th plagues and the world conflagration, were the result of one of these disturbances in the motion of the earth. A few days later, if we follow the biblical narration, immediately before the hurricane changed its direction, the pillar of cloud went from before their faces and stood behind them. This means the column of fire and smoke churned about and appeared from the opposite direction. Mountainous tides uncovered the bottom of the sea. A spark sprang between 2 celestial bodies, and at the churning of the morning, the tides fell in a cataclysmic avalanche. The Midrashim speak of a disturbance in the solar movement on the day of the passage. The sun did not proceed on its course on that day, according to the Psalms 76:8. The earth feared and was still. It is possible that Amos 8:8-9 is reviving the memory of this event when he mentions the flood of Egypt. At the time, the earth was cast out of the sea, and dry land was swallowed by the sea, and the sun was brought down at noon. Although, as I show later on, Amos might have referred to a cosmic catastrophe of a more recent date. Also, the day of the lawgiving, when the worlds collided again, was, according to numerous rabbinical sources, a day of unusual length. The motion of the sun was disturbed. On this occasion, and generally in the days and months following the passage, the gloom, the heavy and charged clouds, the lightning, and the hurricanes, aside from the devastation by earthquake and flood, made observation very difficult, if not impossible. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course, Psalms 82:5, is a metaphor used by the psalmists. The papyrus Ippur, which says that the earth churned over like a potter's wheel, and the earth is upside down, was written by an eyewitness of the plagues and the Exodus. The change is described also in the words of another papyrus, Harris, which I have quoted once before. The south becomes north, and the earth churns over. Whether there was a complete reversal of the cardinal points as a result of the cosmic catastrophe of the days of the Exodus, or only a substantial shift, is a problem not solved here. The answer was not apparent even to contemporaries, at least for a number of decades. In the gloom that endured for a generation, observations were impossible and very difficult when light began to break through. The Calavella relates the dreaded shades envelope the earth, and the sun occasionally steps from his accustomed path. Then Ukko Jupiter struck fire from the sun to light a new sun and a new moon, and a new world age began. In the Volupsa, poetic Edda of Icelanders, we read, "No knowledge she, the sun, had where her home should be. The moon knew not what was his. The stars knew not what their stations were. Then the gods set order among the heavenly bodies." The Aztecs related that there have been no sun in existence for many years. The chiefs began to peer through the gloom in all directions for the expected light, and to make bets as to what part of heaven he, the sun, should first appear in. Some said here, and some said there, but when the sun rose, they were all proved wrong, for not one of them had fixed upon the east. Similarly, the Mayan legend tells that it was not known from where the new sun would appear. However long they looked in all directions, but they were unable to say where the sun would rise. Some thought it would take place in the north, and their glances were turned in that direction. Others thought it would be in the south. Actually, their guesses included all directions, because the dawn shone all around. Some, however, fixed their attention on the Orient and maintained that the sun would come from there. It was their opinion that proved to be correct. According to the Compendium of Wang Xixing, 1526 to 1590, it was in the age after the chaos, when heaven and earth had just separated, that is, when the great mass of cloud just lifted from the earth, that the heaven showed its place. In the Midrashim, it is said that during the wandering in the desert, the Israelites did not see the face of the sun because of the clouds. They were also unable to orient themselves in their march. The expression repeatedly used in the books of Numbers and Joshua, "the east to the sun rising," is not tautology, but a definition which by way testifies to the ancient origin of the literary materials that served as sources for these books. It is an expression that has its counterpart in the Egyptian, the west, which is at the sun setting. The cosmological allegory of the Greeks has Zeus rushing on his way to engage Typhon in combat, steal Europa, Erev, the evening land, and carry her to the west. Arabia, also Erev, kept its name, the evening land, though it lies to the east of the centers of civilization, Egypt, Palestine, Greece. Eusebius, one of the fathers of the church, assigned the Zeus-Europa episode to the time of Moses and the Deucalion flood. And Augustine wrote that Europa was carried by the king of Crete to his island in the west, betwixt the departure of Israel out of Egypt and the death of Joshua. The Greeks, like other peoples, spoke of several reversals of the quarters of the earth, and not merely in allegories, but in literal terms. The reversal of the earth's rotation, referred to in the written and oral sources of many peoples, suggests that the relation of one of these events to the cataclysm of the day of the Exodus, like the quoted passage from the Ishidumaga, a Buddhist text, and the cited tradition of the Kashinawa tribe in western Brazil. The versions of the tribes and peoples of all 5 continents include the same elements, familiar to us from the book of Exodus: lightning and the bursting of heaven, which caused the earth to be turned upside down, or heaven and earth to change places. On the Andaman Islands, the natives are afraid that a natural catastrophe will cause the world to turn over. In Greenland, also, the Eskimos fear that the earth will turn over. Curiously enough, the cause of such perturbation is revealed in beliefs, like that of the people of Flanders, in Belgium. Thus we read, in Menin, Flanders, the peasants say, on seeing a comet, the sky is going to fall. The earth is turning over. It must sound like that's where they got Chicken Little from. Changes in the times and the seasons. Many agents collaborated to change the climate. Insulation was impaired by heavy clouds of dust, and the radiation of heat from the earth was equally hindered. Heat was generated by the earth's contacts with another celestial body. The earth was removed to an orbit further from the sun. The polar regions were displaced, oceans and seas evaporated, and the vapors precipitated as snow on new polar regions and in the higher latitudes in a long thimble winter, and formed new ice sheets. The axis on which the earth rotated pointed in a different direction, and the order of the seasons was disturbed. Spring follows winter, and fall follows summer, because the earth rotates on an axis inclined toward the plane of its revolution around the sun. Should this axis become perpendicular to the plane, there would be no seasons on the earth. Should it change its direction, the seasons would change their intensity and their order. The Egyptian papyrus, known as Papyrus Anastasi IV, contains a complaint about gloom and the absence of solar light. It says also, "The winter is come, as instead of summer, the months are reversed and the hours are disordered. The breath of heaven is out of harmony. The four seasons do not observe their proper times." We read in the text of Taoism, in the historical memoirs of Sima Singh, as in the annals of the Shu King, which we have already quoted, it is said that Emperor Yahu sent his astronomers to the Valley of Obscurity and to the somber residence to observe new movements of the sun and of the moon, and the syzygies, or orbit points, of the conjunctions, also to investigate and to inform the people of the order of the seasons. It is also said that Yahu introduced a calendar reform. He brought the seasons into accord with the observations. He did the same with the months, and he corrected the days. Plutarch gives us following description of a derangement of the seasons. The thickened air concealed the heaven from view, and the stars were confused with a disorderly huddle of fire and moisture, and violent fluctuations of winds. The sun was not fixed to an unwandering and certain course, so as to distinguish Orient and Occident, nor did he bring back the seasons in order. In another work of his, Plutarch ascribes these changes to Typhon, the destructive, diseased, and disorderly, who caused abnormal seasons and temperatures. It is a characteristic that in the written traditions of peoples of antiquity, the disorder of seasons is directly connected with the derangement in the motion of heavenly bodies. The oral traditions of primitive peoples in various parts of the world also retain memories of this change in the movement of the heavenly bodies, the seasons, the flow of time, during a period when darkness enveloped the world. As an example, I quote the tradition, the Oriabi in Arizona. They say that the firmament hung low, and that the world was dark, and no sun, no moon, no stars were seen. The people murmured because of the darkness and the cold. Then the planet god Mashido appointed times and seasons and ways for the heavenly bodies. Among the Incas, the guiding power in regulating the seasons and the courses of the heavenly bodies was Viracocha. The sun, the moon, the day, the night, spring, winter, are not ordained in vain by thee. The American sources, which speak of a world colored red, of a rain of fire, of world conflagration, of new rising mountains, of frightening portents in the sky, of a 25-year gloom, imply also that the order of the seasons was altered at that epoch. The astronomers and geologists whose concern is all this could not affect the derangement of the day and could cover the earth with tenebrosity. Wrote a clergyman who spent many years in Mexico and in the libraries of the Old World, which store ancient manuscripts of the Mayas and the works of early Indian and Spanish authors about them, It did not occur to him that the biblical narrative of the time of the Exodus contains the same elements. With the end of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt, when the Israelites left that country, the old order of seasons came to an end and a new world age began. That's what their scribes were saying. The fourth book of Ezra, which borrows from some earlier sources, refers to the end of seasons in these words. I sent him Moses and led my people out of Egypt. I sent him Moses and led my people out of Egypt, and brought them to Mount Sinai, and held him by me for many days. I told him many wondrous things, showed him the secrets of the times, declared to him the end of the seasons. Because of various simultaneous changes in the movement of the earth and the moon, and because observation of the sky was hindered when it was hidden in smoke and clouds, the calendar could not be correctly computed. The changed lengths of the year, the month, and the day require prolonged, unobstructed observation. The words of the Midrashim that Moses was unable to understand the new calendar refer to this situation. The secrets of the calendar, Sod, Havor, more precisely, the secret of the transition from one time reckoning to another, was revealed to Moses, but he had difficulty in comprehending it. Moreover, it is said in rabbinical sources that in the time of Moses the course of the heavenly bodies became confounded. The month of the Exodus, which occurred in the spring, became the first month of the year. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first of the year to you. Thus the strange situation was created in the Jewish calendar that the new year is observed in the 7th month of the year. The beginning of the calendar year was moved to point about half a year away from the new year in the autumn. With the fall of the Middle Kingdom in the Exodus, one of the great world ages came to its end. The 4 quarters of the world were displaced, and neither the orbit nor the poles, nor probably the direction of rotation, remained the same. The calendar had to be adjusted anew. The astronomical values of the year and the day could not be the same before and after an upheaval in which, as the quoted Papyrus Anastasi IV says, the months were reversed and the hours disordered. The length of the year during the Middle Kingdom is not known from any contemporaneous document, because in the pyramid text dating from the Old Kingdom, there is mention of 5 days. It was erroneously concluded that in that period a year of 365 days was already known, but no inscription of the Middle or Old Kingdom has been found in which mention is made of a year of 365 days, or even 360 days. Neither is any reference to a year of 365 days or to 5 days found in the very numerous inscriptions of the New Kingdom prior to the dynasties of the 7th century. Thus, the inference that the 5 days of the pyramid text of the Old Kingdom signify the 5 days over 360 is not well founded. There exists a direct statement found as a gloss on a manuscript of Timaeus that a calendar of a solar year of 360 days was introduced by the Hyksos after the fall of the Middle Kingdom. The calendar of the Middle Kingdom apparently had fewer days. The fact I hope to be able to establish is that from the 15th century to the 8th century, before the present era, the astronomical year was equal to 360 days. Neither before the 15th century nor after the 8th century was there a year of this length. In a later chapter of this work, extensive material will be presented to demonstrate this point. The number of days in a year during the Middle Kingdom was less than 360. The Earth then revolved on an orbit somewhat closer to the present orbit of Venus. An investigation into the length of the astronomical year during the periods of the Old and Middle Kingdoms is reserved for that part of this work, which will deal with the cosmic catastrophes that occurred before the beginning of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Here I give space to an old Midrashic source, taking issue with a contradiction in the scriptural text referred to the length of time the Israelites sojourned in Egypt. maintains that God hastened the course of the planets during Israel's stay in Egypt, so that the sun completed 400 revolutions during the space of 210 regular years. These figures must not be taken as correct, since the intention was to reconcile two biblical texts. But the reference to the different motion of the planets in the period of the Israelites' stay in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom is worth mentioning. In Midrash Rabbah, it is said that the authority of Rabbi Simon that a new world order came into being with the end of the sixth world age at the revelation on Mount Sinai. There was a weakening, matesh, of the creation. Hitherto, world time was counted, but henceforth we count it by a different reckoning. Midrash Rabbah refers also to the greater length of time taken by some planets. End of chapter.
The Shadow of Death. An entire year after the eruption of Krakatoa in the East Indies in 1883, sunset and sunrise in both hemispheres were very colorful. Lava dust suspended in the air and carried around the globe accounted for this phenomenon. In 1783, after the eruption of Skaptar-Jokul in Iceland, the world was darkened for months. Records of this phenomenon are known in many contemporary authors. One German contemporary compared the gloomy world of the year 1783 with the Egyptian plague of darkness. The world was gloomy in the year of Caesar's death, 44 BC. After the murder of Caesar, the dictator, and during the Antonine War, there was almost a whole year's continuous gloom, wrote Pliny. Virgil described this year in these words: "The sun veiled his shining face in dusky gloom, and the godless age feared everlasting night. Germany heard the clash of arms through all the sky. The Alps rocked with unwonted terrors, and specters, pale in wondrous wise, were seen at evening twilight." On September 23rd, 44 BC, a short while after the death of Caesar, on the very day when Octavian performed the rites in honor of the deceased, a comet became visible at daytime. It was very bright and moved from north to west. It was seen for only a few days and vanished while still in the north. It appears that the gloom which enveloped the world the year after Caesar's death was caused by the dust of the comet dispersed in the atmosphere. The clash of arms heard through all the sky was probably the sound that accompanied the entrance of the gases and dust into the Earth's atmosphere. If the eruption of a single volcano can darken the atmosphere over the entire globe, a simultaneous and prolonged eruption of thousands of volcanoes would blacken the sky. And if the dust of the comet of 44 BC had a darkening effect, contact of the Earth with a great cinder-trailing comet of the 15th century before this era could likewise cause the blackening of the sky. As this comet activated all of the volcanoes and it created new ones, the cumulative action of the eruptions and of the comet's dust must have saturated the atmosphere with floating particles. Volcanoes vomit water vapor as well as cinders. The heating effect of the contact of the globe with the comet must have caused a great evaporation from the surface of the seas and rivers. Two kinds of clouds, water, vapor, and dust, were formed. The clouds obscured the sky, and drifting very low hung as fog. The veil left by the gaseous trail of hostile star and the smoke of the volcanoes caused darkness, not complete but profound, advanced darkness. This condition prevailed for decades, and only very gradually did the dust subside and the water vapors condense. A vast night reigned over all the American land, of which tradition speaks unanimously. In a sense, the sun no longer existed for this ruined world, which was lightened up at intervals only by frightful conflagrations, revealing the full horror of their situation to the small number of human beings that had escaped from these calamities. Following the cataclysm caused by the waters, the author of the Codex, Shemal Papoka, in his history of the suns, shows us terrifying celestial phenomenon, twice followed by the darkness that covered the face of the earth. In one instance, for a period of 25 years, this fact is mentioned in the Codex Chimalpopoca and in most of the traditions of Mexico. Gomara, the Spaniard who came to the Western Hemisphere in the middle of the 16th century, shortly after the conquest, wrote, "After the destruction of the fourth sun, the world plunged into darkness. During the space of 25 years, amid this profound obscurity, 10 years before the appearance of the fifth sun, mankind was regenerated." How? In the years of this gloom, when the world was covered with clouds and shrouded in mist, the Quiche tribe migrated to Mexico, crossing a sea enveloped in somber fog. In the so-called manuscript Quiche, it is also narrated that there was little light on the surface of the earth. The faces of the sun and of the moon were covered in clouds. In the Hermitage Papyrus in Leningrad, previously mentioned, there are lamentations about a terrible catastrophe when heaven and earth turned upside down. "I show thee the land upside down. It happened that which never had happened." After this catastrophe, when darkness covered the earth, the sun is veiled and shines, not in the sight of men. None can live when the sun is veiled by clouds. None knoweth that midday is there. The shadow is not discerned. Not dazzling is the sight when he, the sun, is beheld. He is in the sky like the moon. In this description, the light of the sun is compared to the light of the moon. But even in the light of the moon, objects cast a shadow. If the midday could not be discerned, the disk of the sun was not clearly visible, and only its diffused light made the day different from the night.
The gloom gradually lifted in the passing years.
As the clouds became less thick,
Little by little, the sky and the sun appeared less and less veiled. The years of darkness in Egypt are described in a number of other documents. The Papyrus Ipuwer, which contains the story of the plagues of Egypt, says that the land is without light, dark, in the Papyrus Anastasia IV. The years of misery are described, and it is said, the sun, it hath come to pass, that it riseth not. It was the time of the wandering in the desert. Is there any indication that the desert was dark? Jeremiah 2:6, neither said, "Where is the Lord that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and of pits, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, and where no man dwelt." The shadow of death is related to the time of the wanderings in the desert after the exodus from Egypt. The sinister meaning of the word shadow of death corresponds with the description of the Hermitage Papyrus. None can live when the sun is veiled by clouds. At intervals, the earth was lighted by conflagrations in the desert. The phenomenon of gloom, enduring for years, impressed itself on the memory of the 12 tribes, and is mentioned in many passages of the Bible. "Thou hast covered us with the shadow of death." Psalms 44:19. The people that walked in darkness in the land of the shadow of death. Isaiah 9:2. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness in a solitary way, hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted in them. And the Lord brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death. Psalms 107. The terrors of the shadow of death. Job 24:17. In Job 38, the Lord speaks, "Who shut up the sea with doors, barriers, when it brake forth." I think Velikovsky says the entire Old Testament is basically just from one end to the other. Catastrophes. It's more like history. And I also heard a rumor that it was the history of Atlantis, the destruction of Atlantis. I don't know if that's true or not. "When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness, a swaddling hand for it, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. The low and slowly drifting clouds enshrouded the wanderers in the desert. These clouds dimly glowed at night. In their upper portion reflected the sunlight, the glow being pale during the day and red after sunset. The Israelites were able to distinguish between day and night. They were protected by the clouds from the sun during the wandering in the desert. Midrashic literature. They saw sun and moon for the first time only at the end of the wandering. The clouds that covered the desert during the wandering of the 12 tribes were called a celestial garment, or clouds of glory. He spread a cloud for a covering, and fire to give it light in the night. And the cloud of the Lord was upon them by day. For days, or months, the cloud tarried in one place, and the Israelites journeyed not. But when the cloud moved, the wanderers followed it and revered it, because of its celestial origin. In Arabic sources, too, we read that the Amalekites, who left Hejaz because of plagues, followed the cloud in their wandering through the desert. On their way to Palestine and Egypt, they met the Israelites, and in the battles between them, The screen of clouds played an important part. Nihonji, a chronicle of Japan from the earliest period, refers to a time when there was continuous darkness, and no difference of day and night. It describes in the name of the Emperor Kami Yamamoto an ancient time when the world was given over to widespread desolation. It was an age of darkness and disorder, and this gloom, Hikaho Nanahangi no Mikoto, fostered justice, and so governed this western border. In China, the annals telling of the time of the Emperor Yahoo refer to the Valley of Obscurity and to the somber residence as places of astronomical observations. The name Shadow of Death expresses the influence of the sunless gloom upon the life processes. The Chinese annals of Wang Xixing, in the chapter dealing with 10 stems, the 10 stages of the Earth's primal history, relate that at Wu, the sixth stem, darkness destroys the growth of all things. Buddhist scholars declare that with the beginning of the sixth world age, or sun, the whole world becomes filled with smoke and saturated with greasiness of the smoke. There is no distinction of day and night. The gloom is caused by a cycle-destroying great cloud of cosmic origin and dimensions. On the Samoan Islands, the Aborigines narrate, "Then arose smell. The smell became smoke, which again became clouds. The sea too arose, and in a stupendous catastrophe of nature, the land sank into the sea. The new earth, the Samoan Islands, arose out of the womb of the last earth, in the darkness that enveloped the world. The islands of Tonga, Samoa, Rotuma, Fiji, and Uvea, Wallis Island, and Futuna rose from the bottom of the ocean. Ancient rhymes of the inhabitants of Hawaii refer to a prolonged darkness. The earth is dancing. Let darkness cease. The heavens are enclosing." The Quiche tribe migrated to Mexico. The Israelites were roaming in the desert. The Amalekites migrated toward Palestine and Egypt. An uneasy movement took place in all corners of the ruined world. The migration in central Polynesia, shrouded in gloom, is narrated in the traditions of the Aborigines of this part of the world about a chief named Tureru, who lived long in utter darkness in Aviki, who migrated in a canoe named Weary of Darkness to find a land of light, and who, after many years of wandering, saw the sky clearing little by little and arrived at a region where they could see each other clearly. In the Kalevala, the Finnish epos, which dates back to an enormous antiquity, the time when the sun and moon disappeared from the sky and dreaded shadows covered it, is described in these words. "Even birds grew sick and perished. Men and maidens, faint and famished, perished in the cold darkness from the absence of the sunshine, from the absence of the moonlight. But the wise men of the Northland could not know the dawn of morning. For the moon shines not in season, nor appears the sun at midday from their stations in the sky vault." An explanation that would rationalize this picture as the description of a seasonal long night in northern regions. We'll stumble over the second part of the passage. The seasons did not return in their wonted order, and a dreaded shadow covered the earth when Ukko, the highest of the Finnish deities, relinquished the support of the heavens. Hailstones of iron rained down furiously, and then the world became shrouded in a generation-long darkness. This twilight of the gods of the Nordic races is but the shadow of death of the scriptures. The entire generation of those who left Egypt perished in the lightless desert. Vegetation died in the catastrophe. The Iranian book of Bundahis says blight was diffused over the vegetation, and it withered away immediately when the sky was shattered. The day became dark, and the earth teemed with noxious creatures. For a long time there was no green thing seen. Seeds would not germinate in a sunless world. It took many years before the earth again brought forth vegetation. This is told in the written and oral traditions of many peoples according to the American sources, the regeneration of the world and of humankind took place under the veil of the gloomy shadows, and the time is indicated as the end of the 15th year of darkness, 10 years before the end of the gloom. In the scriptural narration, it was probably the day when Aaron's dried twig budded for the first time. The eerie world, dark and groaning, was unpleasant to all of the senses save the sense of smell. The world was fragrant when the breeze blew. The clouds conveyed a sweet odor. In the papyrus Anastasia 4, written in the year of misery, in which it is said the months are reversed, the planet god is described as arriving with the sweet wind before him. In a similar text by the Hebrews, we read that the times and seasons were confused, and a fragrance perfumed all the world. The perfume was brought by the pillar of smoke. The fragrance was that of myrrh and frankincense. Israel was surrounded by clouds, and as soon as the clouds were set into motion, the winds breathed myrrh and frankincense. The Vedas contain hymns to Agni, which glows from the sky. Its fragrance became the fragrance of the earth, that fragrance of thine, which the immortals of yore gathered up. The tradition of those days, when the star conveyed its fragrance to men on the earth, is immortalized in the tradition of the Hindus. The Vedic hymn compares the fragrance of the star Agni to the scent of the lotus. End of subchapter. Ambrosia. In what way did this evil of gloom dissolve itself? When the air is overcharged with vapor, dew, rain, hail, or snowfalls, most probably the atmosphere discharged its compounds, presumably of carbon and hydrogen. In a similar way, has any testimony been preserved that during the many years of gloom carbohydrates precipitated? When the dew fell upon the camp in the night, the manna fell upon it. It was like the hoarfrost on the ground. It had the shape of coriander seed, the yellowish color of bdellium, and an oily taste like honeycomb. It was called corn of heaven, and it was ground between stones and baked in pans. The manna fell from the cloud. After the nightly cooling of the carbohydrates precipitated and fell with the morning dew. And morning dew still falls, especially in August. The grains dissolved in the heat and evaporated, but in a closed vessel the substance would be preserved for a long time. The exegetes have endeavored to explain the phenomenon of manna and were helped by the naturalists who discovered that a tamarisk in the desert of Sinai sheds its seeds during certain months of the year. But why should this seed be called corn of heaven, bread of heaven? Or why should it be said it will rain bread from heaven? It is also not easy to explain how a multitude of men and animals could have existed for many years in a wilderness on the scarce and seasonal seeds of some desert plant, were such a thing possible. The desert would be preferable to tillable land that yields bread to the laborer only in the sweat of his brow. The clouds brought the heavenly bread. It is also said in the Talmud, but if the manna fell from clouds that enveloped the entire world, it must have fallen not only in the desert of wanderings, but everywhere. And not only the Israelites, but other peoples too, must have tasted it and spoken of it in their traditions. There was a world fire, says the Icelandic tradition, followed by the Fimbul winter, and only one human pair remained alive in the north. This human pair lie hidden in the hole during the fire of Surt. Then came the terrible Fimbul winter, at the end of the world age. Meanwhile, they feed on morning dew, and from them come the folk who people the renewed earth. Three elements are connected in the Icelandic tradition, which are the same three we met in the Israelite tradition: the world fire, the dark winter that endured many years, and the morning dew that served as food during these years of gloom. Then nothing budded. The Maori tribe of New Zealand tell of fiery winds and fierce clouds that lashed the waters into tidal waves that touched the sky and were accompanied by furious hailstorms. The ocean fled. The progeny of the storm and hail were mist and heavy dew and light dew after the catastrophe, but little of the dry land was left standing above the sea. Then clear light increased in the world.
and the beings who had been hidden between sky and earth before they were parted, now multiplied upon the earth. This tradition of the Maoris has substantially the same elements as the Israelite tradition. The destruction of the world was accompanied by hurricanes, hail, meteorites, and sky-high billows. The land submerged. A mist covered the earth for a long time. Heavy dew fell to the ground, together with light dew, as in the passage quoted from Numbers 11:9. The writings of Buddhism relate that when the world cycle comes to an end, with the world destroyed and the ocean dried up, there is no distinction of day and night, and heavenly ambrosia serves as food. In the hymns of Rig Veda, it is said that honey, madhu, comes from the clouds. These clouds originated from the pillar of cloud. Among the hymns of the Ardharva Veda, there is one to the honey lash. From heaven, from earth, from the atmosphere, from the sea, from the fire, and from the wind, the honey lash hath verily sprung. This clothed in amrite, ambrosia, all the creatures revering acclaim in their hearts. The Egyptian Book of the Dead speaks of the divine clouds and the great dew that bring the earth into contact with the heavens. The Greeks called the heavenly bread ambrosia. It is described by the Greek poets in identical terms with manna. It had the taste of honey and a fragrance. This heavenly bread has given classical scholars many headaches. Greek authors from Homer and Hesiod down through the ages continually referred to ambrosia as the heavenly food, which in its fluid state is called nectar. But it was used also as ointment. It had the fragrance of a lily, and as food for the horses of Hera when she visited Zeus in the sky. Hera, Earth, was veiled in it when she hurried from her brother Ares, Mars, to Zeus, Jupiter. What could it be, this heavenly bread, which served also as a veil for a goddess planet, and was used as an ointment too? It was honey, said some scholars, but honey is a regular food for mortals, whereas ambrosia was given only to the generation of heroes. Then what was this substance that served as fodder on the ground for horses, as a veil for planets, bread from the sky for heroes, also turned fluid for their drink, and was oil and perfume for ointments? It was the manna that was baked into bread, had an oily taste, and also a honey taste, was found on the ground by man and beast. Wrap the earth and the heavenly bodies in a veil, was called corn of heaven, and the bread of the mighty, had a fragrant odor, and served the women in the wilderness as ointment. Manna, like ambrosia, was compared with honey and with morning dew. The belief of Aristotle and the other writers that honey falls from the atmosphere with the dew was based on the experience of those days, when the world was veiled in carbon clouds that precipitated honey frost. These clouds are described as dreaded shades in the Calavella. From these dreaded shades, says the Epos, honey dropped, and the clouds, their fragrant, sifted honey from their home within the heavens. The Maoris of the Pacific, the Jews on the border of Asia and Africa, the Hindus, the Finns, the Icelanders, all describe the honey food being dropped from the clouds. Dreary shades of the shadow of death. That also, that the source of the heavenly bread falling from the clouds with the morning dew was a celestial body. The Sibyl says that the sweet heavenly bread came from the starry heavens, the planet god Ukko, or Jupiter. It is said to have been the source of the honey that dropped from the clouds. Athena covered other planet goddesses with a robe of ambrosial and provided nectar and ambrosia to the heroes. Other traditions, too, see the origin of the honey-dew in a celestial body that enveloped the earth in clouds. For this reason, ambrosia, or manna, is called heavenly bread. End of subchapter. Rivers of milk and honey. The honey frost fell in enormous quantities. The Haggadah literature says that the quantity which fell every day would have sufficed to nourish people for 2,000 years. All the peoples of the east and west could see it. A few hours after the break of day, the heat under the cloud cover liquefied the grains and volatilized them. The ground absorbed some of the liquefied mass as it absorbs dew. The grains also fell upon the earth, and the rivers became milky in appearance. The Egyptians relate that the Nile flowed for a time blended with honey. The strange appearance of the rivers of Palestine in the desert is the Israelites, saw no river, caused the scouts to return from the survey of the land to call it the land that floweth with milk and honey. Numbers 13:27. The heavens rain oil, the wadis run with honey, says a text found in Ras Shamara, Ugarit in Syria. In the rabbinical literature, it is said that melting from manna formed streams that furnished drink to many deer and other animals. The Alter Veda hymns say that honey lash came down from fire and wind. End of subchapter. That was a quick one. Jericho. The earth's crust trembled and cracked again and again as its strata settled after a major displacement. Chasms opened up, springs disappeared, and new springs appeared. When the Israelites approached the river Jordan, a slice of one bank fell, blocking the stream long enough for the tribes to cross over. The waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city, Adam, that is, beside Zaratan. And those that came down toward the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed over right against Jericho. A similar occurrence took place on the 8th of December, 1267, when the Jordan was dammed for 16 hours, and again following the earthquake of 1927, when a slice of one bank fell into the river not far from Adam and blocked the water for over 21 hours. At Demia, Adam, the people crossed the river on its dry bed. The fall of the walls of Jericho at the blast of the trumpets is a well-known episode, but it is not well interpreted. The horns blow by the priests for 7 days played no greater natural role than Moses' rod, with which, in the legend, he opened a passage in the sea. When the people heard the sound of the trumpet, it happened that the wall fell down flat. The great sound of the trumpet was produced by the earth. The Israelite tribes, believing in magic, thought that the sound of the earth came in response to the blowing of the ram's horns for 7 days. The great walls of Jericho, they were 12 feet wide, have been excavated. They were found to have been destroyed by an earthquake. The archaeological evidences also prove that these walls collapsed at the beginning of the Hyksos period, or shortly after the close of the Middle Kingdom. The earth had not yet recovered from the previous world's catastrophe and reacted with continuous tremors. When the hour of a new cosmic disaster approached, the event we described at the beginning of this book, only to go back to the cataclysm of the Exodus, the upheaval of the days of Joshua, when the earth stood still on the day of the battle at Beth Horon. End of chapter. And chapter 7 is next, called Stone Suspended in the Air. And there's a subchapter in that chapter 7 titled Atlantis. So I'm going to be interested to see what that's about. That will be coming. Thank you for listening.